1952. The cafes along the Boulevard des Capucines smelled of morning coffee and yesterday's rain when Gregory Peck stepped from a black Citroen onto the wet cobblestones. He was 36 years old, one of the most recognized men on earth, and quietly, completely lost his marriage. To Greta was unraveling, his career stood at its peak. But somewhere between the applause and the hotel room silence, he had stopped recognizing the man in the mirror. Wait, because what happened in the next 2 hours in a quiet Paris office would not make a single front page, yet it would permanently alter Gregory Peck's life and reveal in him something no Oscar nomination had touched. The capacity to be truly wholly seen. Paramount had arranged the interview as a stopover courtesy. Gregory was en route to Rome, where William Wyler waited to begin Roman holiday. He had done dozens of these. Sit, answer, deflect, leave. Have you ever met someone who looked at you not as the version of yourself you had prepared, but as whoever you actually were? The journalist at France Soir was 20 years old. Her name was Véronique Passanni. She had dark, direct eyes, a notebook, and no interest in the interview either of them had been told to expect. She did not ask about upcoming films. She looked at him across the narrow table and asked what he believed, not about acting, but about justice, about McCarthyism, about what a man with a platform owed to people who had none. Gregory's jaw tightened slightly, his large hands folded on the table. He felt genuinely encountered, and Hollywood questions were invitations to perform. Veronique's question was something rarer, an honest inquiry from someone prepared to disagree. He paused, letting silence carry its own weight. Then he spoke in the measured cadence that made rooms lean closer. He said a man's conscience was not a political position, that the blacklist was an assault on the freedom of thought itself, that his father, a pharmacist ruined by the Depression, had left him one inheritance no one could take, the obligation to carry his judgment into rooms where it was inconvenient. Veronique wrote and did not look up. When she finally did, she asked quietly if he ever found it lonely. The question landed differently than anything before it. Gregory was still for a long moment. He said honestly that it was sometimes the price. She nodded, not with sympathy, but with understanding, which is an entirely different thing. They talked 40 minutes past the scheduled end. He missed his first train to Rome. What stayed with him for 6 months of filming was the pretentical quality of her attention. She had asked the questions no one else was asking when Paramount routed him to Paris 6 months later. Gregory had one free afternoon and used it to track down her new number at Paris. Press himself, Veronique nearly rang off, certain it was a mistake. He asked if she would have lunch the following day. She had a prior engagement, a gathering attended by Albert Schweitzer, the Nobel laureate, the kind of afternoon when a journalist would have considered unrepeatable. She canceled it. She would say later she had no explanation, she simply knew. They met near the Hippodrome de Vincennes. He arrived first, sat with his hands clasped, 6 feet 3 inches, entirely still, watching the door. When she walked in, he stood, not for the room, because it was what you did. 3 years of letters and visits followed. On December 31st, 1955, the day after his divorce was finalized, Gregory and Veronique married at a friend's home in Santa Ynez, California. 48 years followed, years of genuine partnership. Veronique co-founded the Inner City Cultural Center, was named Woman of the Year by the Los Angeles Times in 1967, and raised tens of millions for the American Cancer Society. When Gregory died on June 12th, 2003, she was beside him. She continued his work until her own death 9 years later. Do you remember when the greatest love stories weren't spectacles but conversations? This is what Hollywood's golden age looked like before the cameras reached everywhere. A man who had learned to be seen without being known, suddenly known. A woman with a notebook, and the nerve to ask if it was lonely. This is what Hollywood used to mean. Not just fame, but the courage to stay genuine. Share this with someone who believes the moments that change a life rarely announce themselves. Subscribe to keep these stories alive, and in the comments tell us, was there a question someone asked you once that changed how you understood yourself? Every memory is worth keeping. Every voice deserves to be heard.